Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Google Firestarters. So for the uninitiated, Google Firestarters was a series of events we ran at Google over the course of about 10 years, and we pivoted them into a series of virtual chats. My name is Neil Perkin. I'm the moderator and facilitator for Google Firestarters. And so we do these series of video chats with the interesting and the interested of the industry, as we like to say, and today's guest is certainly no exception to that. I'm delighted to introduce Naseemuddeen, who is the Chief Executive Officer of independent agency Omelet out in Los Angeles. So Thaz, welcome to Firestarters. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Neil. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Naseemuddeen. I am the CEO of an agency called Omelet out here in Los Angeles. I spent my career in strategy, and at some of our big agencies out here, Chiat Day, BBH. I was one of the first. I was one of the first of many out in the LA outpost, and yeah, really glad to be here. I've been a huge Firestarters fan for a really long time, so real honor to join you guys.
Amazing, and great to have you as well. So obviously, as you know, Firestarters is structured around 5 core questions. So we ask about the best thing you've learned in your career, what's the biggest mistake you've made, your insight really into how the industry, the advertising and marketing industry is changing, your prediction for the future for the industry, and then also my catch-all question at the end, which is, what's the question that you wish that I'd asked you, and what's your answer to that? So I'm just going to get stuck straight in, if that's all right, with the first question. And I'd just like to understand, Thaz, what have you learned across your career? What's the best thing that you've learned across your career?
I mean, there's so many things, and I continue to learn every single day. But I think for me, one of the most important learnings, and it came early on, was just being a bit bold and being a bit unafraid to reach out and really connect to folks that I found interesting. Back to the point of kind of what Firestarters is all about, being interesting and interested. As a strategist, I think it's so important to be resourceful and really think about how you can connect to the greater world. And I was really fortunate. I came of age as a strategist during the time in which a lot of us were out there blogging, and that was the way that we put our perspectives out there. But it was also this time where social media and Twitter was just starting to take off. And through that, I was really able to be exposed to some great thinkers in the industry and people who are sometimes really far away, not only physically and distance-wise, but also just in terms of career and life experience. Like I was a kind of more junior, mid-level strategist, having conversations with either agencies or people who I really respected. I think at the time, BBH Labs was doing such an incredible job of being thought leaders in the space and really encouraging strategists like myself who, yes, we had really difficult day jobs, but to really kind of expand the way that we thought about the industry. So it wasn't just about strategies and marketing strategies and structures and how we think about kind of the things that we do on our day-to-day, but how we can apply greater culture and the greater world to what we do. I always get brought back to this one big conversation that I remember we had where a lot of us were really interested in design and the effects of Bauhaus design on how we think and how we structure just even problem solving as a whole. And that really stuck with me. And it stuck with me through my whole career where it was about taking something that was a bit out here and connecting it back to how we solve our problems for our clients. And I think it's a skill that, I'm so appreciative of to be able to have kind of blossomed during this time, but truly it wouldn't have happened if I had been kind of tied to my desk doing just the things that I was meant to be doing kind of within my day-to-day work. So I think that was a huge lesson for me early on, was being willing to reach out, being willing to think differently, and really being open to new kinds of perspectives. I think it's something that particularly in the American market, we sometimes aren't the best at that. I really do respect the work and the thinking that comes out globally, because I do think that appreciation of lateral thinking is much more celebrated in cultures outside of our own, and that's where I've always appreciated connections like you, Neil, as well as kind of the greater strategy community.
That's so interesting you say that. I think there was something that I noticed on you've written on LinkedIn about my mission in my career has been to democratize business for creative people, and then the inverse of that, to make creativity more accessible to business. And so tell me a bit about that, because that's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
I feel I learned it early on, and I think as I started to work through my career and meeting people who are not only working within the agency construct, but are partners, people who are photographers and directors, and really kind of involved in the making of things, and understanding that they didn't always understand the business of our business. And I think it was something that I connected to quite early on. And I realized the fact of the matter is a lot of creative people who are starting to get into the world of commercial creativity, because obviously it helps to be an artist that gets paid. And this is a way in for so many. But there is a bit of a blindness when it comes into working with brands and working with agencies that sometimes are simply not taught. There's no book out there that talks about it. There's not a big industry conversation about how do you get into commercial creativity, and here are all the tips and the tricks. So part of my personal kind of goal in my career is to help bring business acumen to more of our creative people. So it's not only our creative partners, but it's our creatives internally as well. I think for a really long time, even for strategists, we often get lumped into the creative world as well. And they're like, oh, no, you guys, you just do your thinking thing. You be creative. We don't want to give you the restraints of business. Like, this is like, let's give you the blue sky. The reality is, like, that's not how the world works. That's not how our businesses are run. And really, I think it shifts the power away from creatives and from strategists when we are completely unaware of what the business ramifications are. I think that's where it's critically important for us as creative professionals to understand the business. It doesn't mean that every single person needs to understand what EBITDA is or why a P&L matters and every kind of nook and cranny of that. But an overall understanding of business acumen is such a powerful trait if you're a creative professional, because it allows you to go past just the thing that you do and really expand into how can you impact a business. And conversely, with clients, I think we, particularly as strategists, we really do act as the bridge between the kind of creative bridge and helping our clients better understand the language of creativity, because it can be quite foreign. It is changing, particularly with a lot more of our agency folks kind of going client side, and there are these kind of in-house agencies that have begun. I think that's changing, and that's a really helpful thing for agency folks. But I do think it's part of our job to help foster the language of creativity within our clients as well.
And I think I'll just go back to that curiosity point, because that was really interesting what you're saying there about outside perspectives and different perspectives. And do you think as an industry that we're quite sort of insular, really, in a way, and we don't necessarily look perhaps outside the industry as much as we should?
We really can. I think that's a thing that we are pushing ourselves. Even at Omelet, we've been talking, we've started a little experiment in Lisbon, where we're working with creatives that haven't necessarily kind of broken out on either the brand side or even kind of just starting to enter the US market, but really kind of their perspectives are so fresh and interesting and new to us. And I think we as an aid, just looking at that small microcosm, I can see the energy that it gives us as creative professionals to be able to bring in people who are looking at briefs and looking at problems in a whole new way. We had a little bit of that at BBH as well, where we brought in creatives who hadn't necessarily ever been working within the confines of an agency. I mean, yes, there are always struggles with that, but that's where the full entity and the full agency really can come together to help bring new kinds of blood and new kinds of voices into the industry. It's not just about kind of young talent, it's about different kinds of talent. And it's historically been really hard because what we do is specific. We do, like, commercial creativity is creativity that is kind of meant to motivate, is meant to help convince people to buy things. There is a whole world in that, and there is a science there's a loose science that's built on that. But I do think that opening up the aperture of how we bring people in is really part of our collective future.
And so let's talk about learning and moving on to the biggest mistake you think you've made really in your career and what you learned from it. So what would that be?
And I think, I mean, I have lots of mistakes. Let's be very honest. I think a lot of us, I think early on, you always think you're quite invincible. Everyone thinks that they know all the things, particularly strategists, particularly plucky young strategists who are, quite confident. But I think the one of the things that I definitely look back on is sort of the path I took to finding my voice. It took a long time, and I think that as kind of extroverted as I may have always appeared on social media and whatnot, I knew internally it took me a long time to be able to really voice up in a room and really kind of find my footing. And when I look back on that, I wish I could tell myself then that I was doing okay. I actually did know quite a few things. But it was a really tough go. And I think particularly in strategy, we have so many brilliant people. And I think it can be quite intimidating, particularly if you find yourself as someone who's a little bit different, who doesn't necessarily look like everyone else, who doesn't have the same accent as everyone else. It was a very new and somewhat intimidating space. And I think for me, one of those big lessons was just kind of believing in myself and believing in my voice to a point where I could make impact. I was like, oh, right, the thing I did that actually is really important and actually can help drive the business. And I probably should sort of said that like 5 days ago, but it's a process. And I think that, as leaders now, it's really important for us to help call new talent in versus, again, just kind of hoping that they'll voice up, because of course that's the way it's supposed to be. Like the most aggressive voice in the room is going to win. Sometimes it takes someone in the room actually calling you in and making sure that your voice is heard and your perspective is, because chances are there are quiet people there who really have them. And I think it's a critical piece of leadership now. But definitely, I wish I thought about that earlier.
There's a wonderful quote actually, which you've written, which I particularly loved actually, which is about your. I think you taught people how to ice skate. Yeah, so. Yes. and there was a wonderful quote there about how teaching toddlers through adults how to navigate ice on a couple of thin blades is a metaphor that's never left me, and I love that. So what did you mean by that? What was the kind of thinking behind that?
I feel like it's even more clear these days as we live through a pandemic. Like the fact of the matter is we're all sort of toddling on a couple of thin blades, hoping for the best. But I truly do believe that, we're always in constant balance as we are creative professionals, and there's so much that's kind of pulling us away. There's so much fear that's also with how that's kind of ingrained in how we are raised as creative professionals. But I think the big thing is as you're teaching, it's really about helping people find their confidence and help them find, because there's no magic to being an ice skater either. There's a lot of hard work. There's all of those things, but balance is actually quite simple. So it's like once you find that, and the funniest part is like it's so much more about that mind-body connection than it is just like kind of physically what you do, which is, again, one of the big strategies that I would have as a young coach was always kind of holding your hands underneath somebody, but never actually holding on. And I think that's an important metaphor for leadership as well, where it's like you have to be there so people feel supported. They feel like their center of balance isn't going to make them fall over every single time, but you also can't grip them, because the funny part is if you actually do grip someone, you are most likely to both fall. So you really need to be able to hold yourself up, but hold yourself up with that kind of feeling of, and that support system that you need to believe in yourself to just stand up on a couple of little blades.
Yeah, and you've written quite a bit about your becoming a leader, becoming the CEO of an agency, and so on. And I mean, what's been your experience of coming from being a strategist and then progressing up through into being just a more general agency leadership role and being a CEO? What's been the experience that you've had?
I've been really fortunate because it's been a really smooth transition for me. I think because I still approach everything as a strategist. At the end of the day, I'm still solving problems. I write myself mini briefs some days about things where it's like and so the principles of how we work have applied so much to how I look at everything. The difference is now, part of my client work is ourselves, and looking at ourselves as a business and how we set ourselves goals and how do we set ourselves up for, what can look like some days a very uncertain future, as we look at how the market shifts and changes. And I think all the skills of a strategist are incredibly powerful for executive leadership, because it does, again, one, it teaches you to think laterally. So you're looking for solutions in different places. You're not always looking to the same thing, because you also know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing even though it's not working. So you get that side of things, but you also have I think the wherewithal to understand that you need to get a wealth of insight before you can get to a solution. So no one single byte of data or byte of information is going to help you, is going to give you the answer. It's going to help you get to a better answer, but it's not going to be the answer. So I think that the whole idea of being able to kind of take multiple ideas, thoughts, and really just inputs, and be able to use that as fuel for decision making and decision making that's quite fast, is incredibly helpful. And for me, it's like, yes, there are a lot of days that I actually miss doing a lot of our key strategy work, but I find myself doing it every day. It's just in a slightly different context.
So I guess in many ways, being a strategist, I guess sort of sets you up quite well then, perhaps for being a CEO. Yeah.
I believe so. I think that there's obviously the differences, and there is the thing that no one told me at the beginning was sort of the emotional burden that comes with being a CEO, because my job is no longer just about making sure clients' objectives are met and our work is fantastic. Those are still important to me, but what's more important is the 60 people that are wonderful human beings that are working with us. And that's where, and making sure that they are challenged, employed in many cases, and really have bright futures and paths ahead of them, is the part that is most important to me now. And that shift is like, and that's where I always say, I'm like, I don't know if everybody is ready for that. And there are days that I question myself if I'm ready for it still, but here we are. And it's a really wonderful feeling, but it's also a very emotionally challenging feeling as well to have that, particularly as we're living through the times that we're living through right now, and ensuring people are feeling good about what they're doing is incredibly difficult when we're all little squares on a screen. But again, there's hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel. But I think we've learned a lot about how we can all be better leaders and better people, thanks to this little crisis.
Yeah, and there was also a really nice quote actually, which you mentioned in one of your pieces, from Jim Carroll, as well at BBH, and so you quote him as saying that you think about leadership as the amplified self. So don't aspire to be someone else. Isolate your truest strengths and be the biggest, boldest version of that. And I really love that.
It's such a brilliant quote from Jim. I feel so fortunate that I got some of that in real life. I managed to meet him once at a dinner in London, and he told me about that. And it was just such a real and frank conversation about, like, how do you show up as a leader? You show up as yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. And it was a very human thought. I'm like, of course, right? That should be obvious. But I think so much of us, and I think that it's really helped me in my transition into being a CEO, because I never wanted to be a different person. I never wanted to be the CEO or whatever I thought that should look like. I just knew that I had to be me, and whatever version of that was a CEO, that helps, again, drive the business, drive our clients' business, and make sure our people are taken care of and are growing. that was it for me. And I think when I think about that idea of the amplified self, it's about finding the things that you do really well and continuing to shine a light on them and grow them even bigger, and not worry about the things that you can't do or the things that you think that you are a deficit in, because like if you spend your career looking at those things, yes, you want to get better. That's like, I think that's where some people kind of take that the wrong way, where it's like, oh, it means that you're just going to do the things that you do well. It's like, yes, but you're never doing them the best. You always have further to go with that. But it is about focusing in on your strengths and focusing in on how you can make those things better versus trying to be the next Martin Sorrell or, you know, someone who is quite esteemed as like a lead holdco business person. I don't know if that's the right person to be kind of holding up in the light, but that's like but I realize that that's not me. I'm like, but the best version of myself and the best version of myself as a leader is extremely valuable, not only to where we are as an industry today, but where our industry is going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've said before as well about being comfortable not knowing all the answers and how that's quite important. Just the humility, I suppose. Do you think that's even more important now?
Yeah, I mean, because there are so many days I definitely have less answers than I have real answers for. And I think it's, you know, I look back on my career and what I expected out of my leaders at the time. And I realize that there are moments that I judge them probably quite harshly, because we are constantly working with an imperfect data set. There is no one right way, particularly when you're running independent creative company. It's like there's no one right way to do anything. You take the data in and you make the best, most informed decision you possibly can. And I think that there's a lot of fear that comes in that and not having the right answers. I remember very early on in the pandemic here, we had our first all agency meeting, and I felt this intense pressure from our people, all of our little squares on the screen, to have an answer about what happens next. Like, when are we going back to the office? And this was now a year ago, and I felt horrible for hours before that meeting, being like, I have no idea what to tell people or when this will be over. I look back on that now, I'm like, don't worry, you were fine. No one knew. But I think it's a pressure that many leaders put on themselves to always have all the answers. And one of the things that I've really tried to work on with myself is to be okay with saying, I don't know yet, or I'm still getting information in, or what do you think? Like, and that's the other thing that I think is so important, is being able to kind of put some of that on not other people to decide for you, but getting that range of perspectives, which I think can be incredibly helpful.
Brilliant. And let's take this into the industry now. And I'd just love your perspective on what you think, how the industry is really changing. So marketing, advertising, planning, I guess, as well. How are those things, do you think? What are the major ways in which they're changing?
I think it's interesting because we've had, as strategists, we've had so many conversations around what is it? Is it about being a specialist or a generalist, particularly as the world has evolved over the last 15, 20 years, and what the needs of our clients are. And I think we've all been, obviously digital has changed everything. And many of us who came on board during that time are kind of steeped in that. And some folks became digital strategists or social strategists or content strategists. Like, there was a lot of delineation between types of strategic work. I think we are coming to a point where it is starting to kind of bubble back up into something that's more centralized, as we are just solving different kinds of problems for our clients. I think the role of agencies has shifted dramatically from, again, 10 years ago, where we were also providing a lot of education, and helping clients understand more about digital ecosystems and all of that. And that hasn't gone away, but it has changed because, again, the levels of knowledge has shifted within our client bodies as well. So it's not necessarily just that anymore. It's about how we connect back to the idea ideas again and how we really make digital work for us. I think we're also entering an era where, particularly in America, where performance marketing and digital marketing have been the end all be all. The dissolving of the third-party cookie, I think, is going to change a lot of that. It's not saying that that's going away. I think that we've proven out that it's a very viable and successful business model. But I think that we are going to get back to some of the more core problem-solving things that we were trying to do years ago, because this isn't necessarily. I think we got a bit comfortable as an industry with one kind of answer, and that answer falling very squarely on data that was provided to us through the means that it was. But it's like, but if that is not there, then what is to come? And I think that's a huge challenge for all of us as we look to the future of kind of what our roles look like within agencies and how we best deliver for our clients.
It's so interesting you say that, because it's come up a couple of times actually in other Firestarters chats we've had about the need to get further upstream and to come in at a higher altitude. I think Tom Morton called it. So, I mean, do you think there's an opportunity here for agencies to be more about defining the problems to solve rather than just being solutions driven?
Absolutely. I think that that's part in ensuring that we are solving for the right problem is going to become more important, because I think we were all solving for the same problem for a long time. And that's sort of where agencies tended to fall in how we could best serve clients. I think with this, we are going to need to get more clever about what we're solving versus just that pure solution. And I think we found that like some of the most rewarding strategy projects I've ever been involved in are the ones that are able to kind of sit as far upstream as possible, where you're helping to define what the brand actually is and where it sits in market, all of those pieces that then can eventually trickle down into, advertising communications, which is critically important. I think for a long time we got, there's like, oh, I don't work in advertising, I work just in brand, like, and working in advertising became quite a bit of a like, oh no, you don't want to be doing that. I think a lot of us have sort of accepted that this is part of it is part of the product in which we create. It's not the only thing we do, but I think making sure that we are now upstream far enough that we aren't just relegated to the ad product, but also really coming up with more business-focused solutions. I think there are a lot of great agencies who have done an awesome job of that, and I think that that's what we as an agency also aspire to get to more of.
And I guess that goes back to what we were saying before, isn't it, about making creativity more accessible to business? Is that really a way of solving bigger problems, is to apply creativity in different ways?
Exactly. And I think that's where, again, like there are different ways at problems that many of us just haven't still got to. It's because we are still in the brand and communications kind of construct often. We aren't always able to pull ourselves out of that and out into all of the other areas that we could touch audiences and really connect in sometimes more meaningful ways, that can drive loyalty, in more meaningful ways that can actually drive kind of the core of the business, not just kind of how people feel about a business.
And let's do a bit of future gazing now. And so your prediction for where the industry is going, what would that be?
I think that, again, we're clearly still in a space where there's a lot more questions than we have answers, particularly when it comes to digital. I think that the pandemic has fueled our need and desire for great digital experiences. So I think that is clearly a part of our future. If vaccine rollouts aren't the thing, I don't know what the thing is that's going to convince the world that we need better and more user experience work. So I think that will be key. I also think that one of the big things that we're seeing with our clients is the increased scrutiny and acuity around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think it's really important for us to think about it outside of just an HR function, because it's not. It's a function of a strategist. It's a function of creative. It's a function of every brand person. Everyone. It's a part of how we think about the world. It's a part of how we think about the way we've always done things. And I think this is a moment in time, particularly in America, where we're questioning how the structures and the structures that we've created have led to the kinds of products and communications that we have today. We have great, challenging clients that are really pushing us to be better as an industry. And it's not just about, again, making sure that the workplace is more diverse. It's about how we approach the work. It's the empathy and the sensitivity that goes into how we think about our audiences. That's all stuff that, again, is not an HR function. And it is an important part of what HR does within an organization, but it's not the only thing. And we're learning every single day about how we show up as better leaders in this as well. And I know it's not just about, clients aren't just asking you your DEI numbers so they can check a box. They're looking at that because they expect the work to look and feel and be thought of differently. And I think as agency leaders, it's incredibly important for us to continue to push that narrative within the whole organization that we work with to ensure that we are being representative.
It's so interesting what you say there, that this is not just about the workforce, but about how you approach the work and the outputs. So I guess what you're saying there is about the opportunity of diversity, not just the numbers and box ticking, but it's actually about bringing diversity into everything that you do. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I will say, in the last year, we've seen so much of it in action, and I'm so excited and so proud of where we're going, because I've seen it work. And that's the difference of it. It's like you can start to see what the magic is. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just words on a page and filling out surveys. It's truly about how it can impact the way that you work and the kinds of creative product that you can make.
Excellent, thank you. And so my last question is my catch-all question. Which is really, what question do you wish that I'd asked you, and what is your answer to that? So Thaz, if you could give us your answer to that, please.
Of course. I love this, because I'm like, the question that I have, and I have it myself, and I don't have the right answer for it. I don't know if any of us do, but my main question is really, how do we as an industry begin to infuse a bit of the fun and the energy that I think we once had, but maybe have lost a bit of. I mean, I say this all in the context of a global pandemic, which of course there's a lot of things that have been lost within this. But I do think that it's part of what fuels our industry, and it's what fuels creativity. And part of my remit is now to think about and really sort of help construct a way forward. How do we bring more fun into this industry? How do we get some of that mojo and spirit back where we were? I even remember 10 years ago, we were breaking new things. We were making products. We were thinking about, some of these things were absolutely useless and made no sense when I look back at them 10 years later. But I feel we had a bit more of a spirit of experimentation as well. I think as we've looked at things that are quite not confined, but constricted a bit by data and how we think about things, I want us to think about how we can use all of these great tools that we have, including data, as kind of creative firepower versus just kind of tighter boxes. And that is something I don't have the answer for today, but I'm really hoping that we as an industry start to edge towards.
Why do you think the fun has sort of gone, really, or is having less fun now in the industry? What happened there?
I think somewhere along the lines, advertising got a bit heavy, and truthfully, the whole world got heavy. So I think that there's fairness to that, and it shouldn't just all be bells and sunshine. But I do think that there needs to be an element of joy within what we do to really be able to do it well, because again, we're not making widgets, we're not working in factories and things like that. We are creating, and I think that again, we started to look at a lot of like maybe the scary spreadsheets, maybe the kinds of briefs we started to get, but I feel like we just got really constrained by some of the forces around us versus having those things be like the light or the opportunity in where we could go. We talk, because we're an egg-based brand, we talk a lot about cracks, and one of those things is we always try to talk about finding the light within the crack. So again, the industry is full of cracks and fissures, and really this is about us trying to help unearth some of that. But I think that the heaviness of the world is really weighed on us in our abilities to kind of forge those lights again. But my hope is that we're able to get there in quite short order, because I think we need it. We need to be able to be inspired and inspiring again, because it's a dead end if we don't.
So you mentioned sort of experimentation and things. I mean, what would you like to see more of really in the industry?
I think that the fact that we are no longer really doing the big kinds of not even big kinds of experiments, but the experiments that aren't necessarily, that feel more like hypotheses around the versus this is going to work. Don't worry, your ROI is going to, again, I think that's the thing, that when digital was a newer thing and it was more difficult to figure out, there were less benchmarks out there. I think we were more apt to try different ways at things. Whereas right now digital is in its mature phase. We have solutions that we know work, and we are much more apt to go back to the playbook and use those versus maybe trying something that feels a little bit sideways, and maybe it won't be 100% more effective on first measure, but it's going to take time to develop and grow that, and it could give us something that's 20x times effective. But again, we have to allow ourselves to fail a little bit more briskly.
I think that's a great note on which to draw it to a close. But Thaz, thank you so much for being part of Firestarters, and so great to have you finally as part of Firestarters.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. It's been a decade of watching.
And thank you to everybody else for watching, of course. And don't forget to like and to share the video. But my thanks again to Thaz and Naseemuddeen. Been great to have you as part of Google Firestarters. Thank you.